We're back with the second hour of the Grassy Knoll, and we're with George Humphrey, author of Common Sense, An Introduction to the Dangers of the New World Order, and 9/11, The Great Illusion. We want to let everyone know once again that you can send an AOL instant message to this address, AM 1350 WDCF. You can also send a question or a comment via Hotmail, and that's Vyzygoth at hotmail.com, VYZYGOTH. And once again, let everyone know that the views expressed in the Grassy Knoll are not necessarily those of the management staff or advertisers of WDCF, WZHR, and the Tan Talk Network. And now we're going to rejoin George Humphrey for the second hour of the Grassy Knoll on AM 1350 WDCF. And George, are you with us? Hello, George.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. I'm here. I hear you loud and clear.
If I could, a couple of bullet questions going through the centuries rather quickly about some subjects to which you spoke in Common Sense. And one of them is about the American Revolution. Yes. Now, let me ask you this. Have you ever heard of an author by the name of Eric John Phelps?
No, I have not.
All right, he's written a book called The Vatican Assassins, in which he chronicles the provocateuring, if you will, of the Vatican and its Jesuit order. And by the way, did you ever come across that at all in your research? Not necessarily his book.
Jesuit order, the Black Pope?
Yeah.
Of course. The
okay.
Black Pope is, my mother's side of the family is Catholic, and so, I've done a little bit of studying in this, but quite clearly the Catholic Church has presented to the people of the world, we have the white Pope, but the real power of the Catholic Church clearly is the Black Pope, or the leader of the Jesuits.
Yeah, and this is not to say that Roman Catholics are necessarily bad. It's just, again, they do not understand that
right.
Perhaps the goal of the Vatican has always been, as far as they're concerned, or it's concerned, the...
Well, factors within the Catholic hierarchy are about command and control. Now, clearly there's many, many, many very spiritual and wonderful groups and factions within the Catholic Church, but people have to be aware that the real power of the Catholic Church is the head of the Jesuits, which is called the Black Pope.
And who is holding them back at this time in history. Yeah, we've always seen the Vatican as first being Romanist. They added the word Catholic later on, but also that they seek the second coming of the Roman Empire. So they've got their own agenda as well with all the other global elites, do they not?
Well, that's the way it appears to me, is that when you, and I'm saying this having come from a Catholic, my mother's side is Fitzgerald, which is Irish Catholic, and when I go to our family reunions, we go to Mass, but quite clearly when you read the history of the Catholic Church, it is about command and control. It's the destruction of the Mithras. It's the destruction of the Cathars. It's the destruction of any organization that isn't opposed to it. And, when you take a look at the history of the popes and what they have done, both the male and female popes, both the married and non-married popes, it is a political history. It is not a spiritual history.
I had started off, though, on the note of American Revolution and digressed, obviously, but Phelps was always a big believer that Providence was on the side of the colonists, and that's why we supposedly won the American Revolution. I don't necessarily agree with him, so I'm going to ask you your take. From what you said, or what you stated through Common Sense, it would indicate, and as I happen to believe, that perhaps the Brits, because of, some kind of propinquity through being related to colonists, also through being brothers in Freemasonry, did they really try all that hard, perhaps, to quell the American Revolution?
Well, quite clearly, even at the end of the American Revolution, the British had twice as many soldiers. They were better trained. They had far more armaments. They had far more money. They had a navy that was superior, and even though France was coming in on the side of the United States, is that militarily the English could have won this thing at if they had pursued a more aggressive path. But clearly, several of the generals and several of the admirals were related to the colonists. They weren't going, and quite clearly they realized that they were not going to win the hearts and the minds of the people. And it's like in Iraq right now. Even though we have more guns, we've already lost the war, because there is no way we can change the hearts and the minds of the people. And the British nobility started realizing that King George was not making good decisions. So there was a combination between the military of both the admirals and the generals and the merchant class and the nobility saying, look, this is a lost cause. And so for whatever reason, we got the United States of America, which in my opinion is a great thing. And as Thomas Paine said, that we are the beacon of freedom for the rest of the world. And whether we start it totally idealistically or not, I believe it is our right and our responsibility. I think Thomas Paine said this: the cause of America is in great measure the cause of all mankind. And regardless of whether everything that we've done has been idealistic or not, our fight for freedom and our fight for our Constitution, our Republic, it does not just stop at the borders of the United States. It doesn't stop at the city limits of Tampa or Austin, Texas, or San Francisco. The fight for freedom and truth that we are carrying on right now in the United States has repercussions for the whole world, because the global elite, led by the Illuminati or the Zionists or whatever you want to call these people, they are not satisfied with just total political or economic control. They are like psychic vampires, and they will just keep going and going and going, because they are secular, they are atheistic, they are totally materialistic, and they are operating from a level of consciousness that has no divine message, no spirituality. And so the message is that we're giving about the Freemasons and about the Knights Templars and about all this stuff really does affect everybody listening.
What I'm going to do is give you 3 breakpoints, and I would ask you to speak to them as we bring ourselves into the 20th century. 1, the Civil War did much. I'm going to just throw this out. The Civil War did much to eviscerate what the Founding Fathers had desired. 2, to get Wilson into office, to bring about the Federal Reserve Act, the IRS, and of course World War I and the League of Nations. And 3, FDR, and on his tour, Sovietizing for the most part the United States. So let me bring you back, George. Point number 1. Do you want to speak to the Civil War and what its impact was?
I couldn't understand you on point number 1.
All right. My belief is that the monarchies, especially England, and perhaps France, very much wanted to see the United States experiment eviscerated, and had a lot to do to instigate the Civil War to bring about that end, so that they would kill states' rights and get into a federalized situation which expanded government. So there's point number 1.
Well, quite clearly, Alexander Hamilton was a British agent, and he was one of many who were working for the federalization and the concentration of control in the federal government. And quite clearly, the biggest single topic of debate since the start of our country has been between the populist and those who believe in the Constitution, those who believe in the Bill of Rights, those who believe in the Republic and the decentralization of power, and those who are manipulated and controlled by the bankers / the monarchies. And we have seen this not only through the American Revolution, but a lot of people don't realize that the War of 1812 was started when the first Bank of the United States, that charter expired, and the populists were trying to return to constitutional banking, and the British said, "You're not going to do that," and they came in and burned down our they burned down parts of Washington.
Right.
And then we had an eruption when Andrew Jackson, who was a populist, got elected. They tried to assassinate him on 7 different times. Abraham Lincoln, when he brought in constitutional money or Lincoln greenbacks, he was assassinated shortly thereafter, and quite clearly there were connections with the British monarchy. McKinley was assassinated.
Garfield?
Excuse me?
And Garfield was assassinated?
Absolutely, and then we go on, and then we go into John Kennedy. And so remember, follow the money, and every single time that the populace or the people who believe in this country have tried to restore constitutional banking and bring back a fair and equitable form of money, is that the bankers / monarchy / rascals, whatever you want to call them, they will stop at almost nothing to restore their control.
Then moving on to the second point I had broached, and that is
Wilson.
Yeah, Wilson. And in this, I would also ask, well, now isn't it interesting? Now, you brought up in Common Sense the deal about bringing Perot out to eviscerate Bush so that Clinton would look better.
Yeah.
Right? Now, let's go back to the Wilson-Taft-Teddy Roosevelt election. They brought in Teddy to kneecap Taft.
Well, remember, Teddy Roosevelt was related with Franklin in that his great-uncle was a founding father of the Illuminati Lodge, of the Colombian Illuminati Lodge. Now, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the Delanos were the biggest drug runners in the world. They were the drug runners who brought the opium from India to China to create tens of millions of addicted heroin users in China.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Roosevelt family is just, and this is just historic fact, is totally, completely controlled and is one of the prime movers and shakers of the Illuminati. Now, he came in and made it possible for Woodrow Wilson, who was hand-selected by Jacob Schiff and a guy called Edward Mandel House. Edward Mandel House was right from here in Austin, Texas.
Yep.
And they were the Rothschild agents, and they saw this kind of bonehead professor down at Princeton, and they got him elected as governor of New Jersey, and within 6 or 8 months he was running for president, and the guy was completely, totally controlled by Colonel Edward Mandel House, perhaps the most powerful personality of the 1900s.
And let me share this with you because I think you'll find this kind of precious. I hate to use that word, but House, for a figure who looms so large in the American landscape and to be completely invisible in history textbooks is huge, because House was there for the Federal Reserve also, was he not?
It's just amazing. Again, Colonel House was right here from my hometown, Austin, Texas, and when he lived here, there's only about 10 or 15,000 people who lived here. It was just a small little town. And most people in Austin and Texas have no idea who this guy is. He is the guy who started the Federal Reserve Banking Act. He's the guy who brought us the federal income tax. He's the guy who helped engineer the events that got us into World War I. He's the guy who helped engineer the mini depression of 1920. He's the guy who helped engineer the Great Depression of 1928. And on his dying days, he was one of the guys who got Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the greatest wolf in sheep's clothing, elected president of the United States. The guy was awesome. He was the amazing string puller. And if you want to know what he really believed, all you have to do is read his book called Philip Drew, Administrator, in which he declares that he is a Marxist.
Yep.
He is an open, out-and-out Marxist in the terms of Horace Greeley as a communist, which is part of the Illuminati. He says it in his own words. And this guy, by pulling the strings, was able to completely change the course of events in this country. And again, because the victors write the history, very, very seldom do even educated people ever read about Edward Mandell House.
Well, in my hands I hold a book of antiquity published in 1926. The title of it is The Intimate Papers of Colonel House. It's written by Charles Seymour. Now, Wilson got elected with, "We won't bring our boys into World War I." But in these papers between House and everybody, including Wilson and a very, very interesting personage from across the Atlantic Ocean by the name of Lord Grey, there's no doubt that House worked Wilson into getting us into World War I. And if I can just read you a little snippet of a letter from House to Wilson, November 30th, 1960. And, of course, Wilson was going to come out with that note to try to broker a peace with Germany. And so when you hear the word note, that's what it refers to. Here's House. "I have been thinking a lot of your proposed note to the belligerents, and I cannot bring myself to believe that it should be done immediately or without further preparation. You have before you the biggest opportunity for service that was ever given to man, and I hope you will not risk failure. Since you first suggested your plan, I have talked with everybody within my reach whose opinion I value, many of them having an intimate knowledge of the situation in the Allied countries, and there is not one that believes it could be successful at this time." I don't have to go on with that, but you can see how House worked Wilson.
Well, he was also very involved is that when Trotsky came to New York, and remember, Trotsky was this Bolshevik, bearded Bolshevik with a hair robe. He comes into New York, and where does he stay? He stays at the Plaza Hotel in the penthouse on the tab of Jacob Schiff and Edward Mandell House. They raised $18 million in gold bullion, which was a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
They recruited 300 mercenary soldiers out of the Bronx, and then they send them over to Europe, and they get them over to Russia to start the Bolshevik Revolution.
Right.
This is all historical information.
Right.
It could have been stopped. They knew what was going on. And the first Russian Revolution, which was conceived of by Russian Christians, they had a constitution that was word for word the same as our American Constitution, and our president would not support them. He wouldn't support them until the Bolsheviks that were paid for by Jacob Schiff and by Colonel Edward Mandell House that were out communists and destroying, then our president supported the Bolsheviks. This is absolutely true history that is never taught.
One of the great episodes in that, too, is Trotsky getting caught by the Canadians when he's going Nova over
Scotia, yeah.
Let him go.
Yeah, they said let him go.
That's amazing. All right. Lastly, what happened to us during Roosevelt's watch?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt?
Yeah, obviously the Depression was manufactured.
And that's something that most people don't realize. The Great Depression was absolutely manipulated and controlled by Warburg, who was head of the Federal Reserve. And remember, the head of the Federal Reserve of our country, which is the most powerful position in the world, the first head of it was not even American. He was a German. His brother, Max Warburg, head of the Bundesbank, and he created the massive First Depression and inflation in Germany, which resulted in Hitler coming in. I mean, and again, these things seem preposterous to those who have not read this, but when you do objective research, you find out that a handful of these people, who are all members of this thing called the Illuminati or the power elite or the Bolsheviks or political Zionism, is that they have been pulling the strings to destroy Western culture and economy for the last 100 years. And it is a horrid set of events, but it will continue only as long as the people allow it through ignorance.
All right. Before we ask you again to give ordering information, I will tell you this. You went into the Bilderbergers and the Trilaterals and those societies. I'm going to skip by them because we had Galen Ross on, and of course he touched upon them as well. And we also had on Chris Milligan, who was the contributing editor to Fleshing Out Skull and Bones, and he laid it on the Delanos for the drug dealing and such. So before we go into 9/11, again, please, George, tell people how they can get a hold of your material.
Okay, you can go on our website, www.fearorlove.com, fearorlove.com, all lowercase, and I think you'll find it really nice. We've got a great catalog. I have written 3 different booklets, Common Sense, Uncommon Sense, and 911, The Great Illusion. I also have all of those on audio booklets that are wonderful, both in CD and in tape, very, very moderately priced, and I have just come out with a documentary called 911, The Great Illusion. It's about 2 hours long, and you can show this documentary to the biggest skeptic, somebody who doesn't believe in any of this stuff, and they will come away realizing that the story that has been told to us about 911 is a total fairy tale, and that it will wake people up to this massive, massive manipulation because they can see it with their own eyes. It's just so you can go to fearorlove.com. You can write us at P.O. Box 5772, Austin, Texas 78763, or you can contact us through email at commonsense@fearorlove.com. commonsense@fearorlove.com. And we have catalogs. We carry other authors, and we have some really great videos from other people. And if you visit our website or get a catalog, you'll find a lot of really, really great information.
And let's move on to 9/11, The Great Illusion.
A lot of fun. I just came out with this documentary, and I'd never made a documentary before, and I'll tell you what, it is so much fun to make these things, and the response on this thing has just been overwhelming. I mean, it's just been lovely, and I would guess that most of your listeners have seen Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11, and which is a very powerful, powerful documentary.
Yeah.
It's my opinion that Michael Moore only went about 1/10 of the way, and it's a very biased movie.
Yep.
My documentary takes it. I mean, it goes the whole 9 yards, and we break it up again into linear ways to think about this linearly. First of all, the events that happened before 9/11. Secondly, what happened during the hijackings themselves. Third, what happened or did not happen at the World Trade Center. And quite clearly, the story that we're told about what happened in the World Trade Center is just an amazing, amazing pack of lies. Fourth, what happened at the Pentagon. And fifth, events since 9/11. And when you take, and I have 60 different points that we show, we have tapes, we have films, we have references, we have our own soundtrack on this, which is very good. The motion graphics were done by Mason Collier. They're really, really interesting. And when you look at this point by point by point by point, it cannot be refuted that it was that 911 was an inside job done and organized by people right here in the United States, and that this thing about Al Qaeda and Bin Laden and Afghanistan organized, it is just a total fairy tale.
Well, we all realize here, and we're not going to try to convince anybody necessarily, because those who have been with the show obviously know what's going on, and that what they did is create a triggering event through which they could connect any country they wanted to this phantasma called terrorism.
Right.
But when you saw what took place on that Tuesday day in September of 2001, did you buy the original breakout as to what happened, or were you immediately skeptical?
Well, I remember I was just getting up and I was cleaning up the house, and the phone rang, and the phone almost had a willpower of its own. And I picked it up, and it was a friend of mine. He said, "You've got to turn on the TV," and I turned it on. And as soon as I saw the World Trade Center aflame, I knew that this was the opening gambit of the Illuminati in their end game scenario. I mean, it was so clear to me. And then I saw the next plane come and hit the South Tower, and it was just like, oh my goodness, boy, these rascals are really going after it. And as David Rockefeller said, he said this just before 9/11. He said, quote, "We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the new world order." I mean, that's pretty strong stuff. And so as soon as I saw these buildings aflame, I realized that this was what's called an Hegelian event, or thesis, antithesis, synthesis, problem, reaction, solution. And just like Hitler burned down the Reichstag with his own people, and everybody freaked out, and that allowed him to round up all of his political opponents, I realized that this was this masterful Hollywood. It wasn't, I mean, the planes really did hit in there, but this was a totally created Hegelian event to create the events that have happened since then. And anyone, and I don't care whether you're black or white, Hispanic, Republican, Democrat, rich or poor, I don't care who you are, if you've got even an ounce of integrity and objectiveness in you, if you do any objective research, you can prove to yourself without a doubt that there were bombs in the World Trade Center buildings 1, 2, 5, 6, and 7 previous to the planes hitting, that this was a manufactured event, that the jets and the jet fuel did not bring down the World Trade Center, that it is questionable whether Flight 77 actually hit the Pentagon. It is very questionable whether the hijackers really did what they said, and on and on and on. And all of these things are very revolutionary, but when we break them down to each single point, you and I can prove to your listeners that these things are true.
Well, let's take them one by one in this last half hour. Let's take the Pentagon, for instance.
Okay.
Some anomalies. First of all, where's the wreckage?
Well, when you take a look at the situation in the Pentagon, you've got to look at the whole scenario. And Flight 77 took off, and in the front of my book is that we have the whole chronology of events. Flight 77 was an American Airlines, and it took off from Dulles at 8:10. By 8, giving them every benefit that we can, by 8:24, we knew that flights 11 and 175 were hijacked. So the FAA was completely aware that there were massive hijackings going on. Shortly thereafter, at about 8:27, Flight 77 deviated from course while it was flying west over Virginia. Now, just using standard operating procedure is that NORAD should have sent up jets, F-16s, from both Langley and some of the other Air Force bases.
Andrews, sure.
Well, and Andrews, to go out there and find out what was going on with Flight 77. And it didn't just deviate by a mile or two, it deviated by about 48 miles. And then it came back on course and continued flying westwardly over West Virginia. It then got to the border of West Virginia and Ohio. And again, the FAA knew and NORAD knew that the other planes were hijacked. It then made contact with the FAA in Indianapolis. 17 seconds later, Flight 77, not only the transponder went off, but it went off the radar screen. Now, talking to Russ Wittenberg, and Russ Wittenberg was a pilot in Vietnam. He flew for Pan American and United. He has over 22,000 hours in 747s, 57s, and 767s. He was a full-fledged captain, and he knows more about aviation in his little finger than I've read and I've read many books about this and all these other books put together. The only thing that could have happened is that all of the radar screens, and there were about 4 overlapping radar screens, they all broke at the same time. B is that they're absolutely lying to us.
Mm-hmm.
C is that they took the plane up over 65,000 feet, which a 757 could not do.
Mm-hmm.
Or C, or 5, it landed, or the last one, or landed or crashed, or it came back at less than 200 feet below ground. Now, a 757 flying at 200 feet over ground over the mountains of West Virginia
right.
and Virginia, thousands
mm-hmm.
of people would have seen it. Nobody saw it.
Right.
Now, the 911 Commission never, ever addressed that. Now, there are some people who believe that the plane was landed at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which was at the area, which was a Air Force base that has been abandoned. But that's where they have the Global Hawk technology. Then 47 minutes later is that the plane, the so-called plane, shows up on the radar screen coming from the southwest of Washington in the Pentagon, ripping down from 30,000 feet at 525 knots per hour toward the Pentagon. Again, this has been over an hour, and still NORAD has not scrambled any planes. And we all remember the golfer Payne Stewart. Now, he was in his plane flying from Tampa to Dallas. They
mm-hmm.
had a leak of carbon monoxide. The people passed out. And within 18 minutes, NORAD had scrambled
right.
one plane, and within 22 minutes, they had scrambled 4 planes that were on their tail. That is standard operating procedure.
Right.
No planes during this whole hour, not one was scrambled. Now remember, the Pentagon is the most protected airspace in the whole world. Now we know 2 other planes, now we know 4 planes are hijacked, and that you have a plane coming in toward the Capitol going at 525 knots per hour. No planes from Andrews or Langley are scrambled.
Right.
Then the plane deviates from course, goes north around the Pentagon, and originally the plane was headed directly at Donald Rumsfeld's office. Then it deviates from course and heads toward the Capitol. Again, no planes are scrambled. Then it hits a turn of 280 degrees, going 475 knots per hour. Now, when we're on a commercial airliner, they're going at a lot slower speed, but even when you hit a hard turn, you're pulling at the most about 2 Gs in gravity. Going at 475 knots per hour, hitting a 280-degree turn at less than 10,000 feet, you're going to be pulling 6.5 to 7 Gs. Now, the guys who supposedly flew this plane could not even check out Cessnas, and the 2 guys that the FBI said who were flying this plane, one was his name was Khalid al-Midhar, and the other was Nawak al-Hamzi. And according to their flight instructor at the Sorby Flight School, and this was about 3 weeks before, he said they were nice guys, but it was like Dumb and Dumber. They were never going to make it as pilots. For us to believe that they could hijack this plane using paper cutters, that they knew how to turn off the transponder, that the pilots made no communications with the FAA, then they could fly this thing by hand back and then hit a 270-degree turn, come in, and there's no way they could have done that,
no.
and then level off and hit the Pentagon in the only area that was where it was reinforced, and only about, quote, 15 people saw it, and then there was no wreckage, no bodies, no film, no pictures. What's wrong with this picture?
a couple of things. First of all, we got a wag that has just IM'd me, and I'm just going to read these comments off. You'll get a kick out of it. He says, Wright-Patterson is the UFO base that Goldwater could not get into.
Right.
And he says, maybe these are good guys if they were aiming for Rumsfeld. But again, let's talk about this also. We saw the original photo before the facade fell down, and that was just about a 50-square-foot hole. Entrance.
Right.
Right.
And
now,
the plane was huge.
And then we've got 3 symmetrical holes out of ring E, D, and C. Now, what in the world made that? The nose? I doubt it. And the other thing is, George, if this thing was going to come in at such a low level, a 757, to hit without touching the ground, it had to start its descent 2, 3, 4, 5 miles out. It would have ravaged everything if it could even get to it.
It's so amazing. And then the Pentagon releases these 2 pictures that says they have it. And when you look at the pictures, there's no plane in the picture, but there's a contrail. They say the plane is behind this like little building, but you can see a contrail. But 757s don't leave contrails at the temperatures they have. No. It would be impossible. And then you see the explosion, but the explosion is a white explosion.
Right.
The jet fuel is a hydrocarbon, and it would have been a red. The forensics of the explosion would have been red. It is just one factual piece of information out of another that shows that the government story is absolutely
bogus.
Ludicrous.
Right. Well, we also had other shows where people talked or had made statements, which I read from transcripts, about the number of Air Guard units that there are between Boston and Virginia, and that the D.C. Air Guard would not go up, or that Andrews would not go up. It's ludicrous. But then, we've heard the stories about perhaps exercises being conducted that day to simulate hijackings. And, of course, but the whole thing stinks to high heaven. And if I could, George, let me move you around to what happened in New York. We had on last week, a guest who was fleeing the towers, and so without a doubt there were detonations in there, and no one's going to tell who different.
No question there were detonations. That's absolutely provable fact by the seismographic that we'll get into. But coming back to this, the Pentagon is the most photographed and protected building in the whole world.
Exactly.
They had over an hour and 10 minutes of knowledge and information on this, and to say that there was no pictures is just absolutely insulting.
Right.
Now, another thing is that the FBI was sent out 15 minutes after it hit to confiscate the cameras in buildings around the Pentagon. Now, the explosion of this would be a hydrocarbon explosion, which means the temperature would be 1,800 degrees. Where is the landing gear that is made out of steel that doesn't melt until 2,700 degrees? Mm-hmm. Where is the evidence? Where is the tailpiece? Where is the engines? Where are the rotors? None of that information is there, and we have scans and pictures of the wreckage, and none of it is there. I mean, the American people have been lied to so amazingly, and it is really frustrating that still a vast majority of the people don't even seem to care about this.
Honestly, when I talk to people who would trust my credibility, though they are few, my best friends for years, and I'm saying, listen, and they look at you and they you know what? They do understand, but they just don't want to deal with it.
They're afraid.
Yes.
And friends who are listening to this, your silence will not protect you. Is that this is a big deal, friends. This has totally changed the way of life in this country, in this world. And it is so easy to prove that this was a conspiracy. Yes, I'll use the C word. And a conspiracy of the worst type, funded and founded and carried out by elements right here within our own government, that unless we stand up and say no, we demand the truth and we demand justice right now, is that the future of this country is not very bright.
I got another IM, and this does put another light on it. Consider this. The individual wrote, they found more blank from the shuttle, and that was 3,000 plus degrees, and they put that thing together, and they couldn't find anything around the Pentagon. And I think that does put it in a proper perspective, don't you?
Absolutely. It's just, anyone with any common sense can look at this and find out what. But then we go to what happened in the World Trade Center, and it makes the information at the Pentagon seem small. There is absolute proof that the World Trade Center buildings that there were bombs in the World Trade Center building. Do we have time to go into that right now?
Yeah, but before we do, I tell you what, Thought Criminal's been waiting to ask you a question. Would you feel that, please, George?
Oh, of course.
Shoot.
Hi, Thought Criminal, and thanks for joining us tonight. Oh, I'm Thought Criminal. Of course I am. You're George. I was wondering, could you comment about the folks that, they are repeatedly bombarded with truthful, factual information, yet they refuse to believe it. We were misled into the First World War, misled into the Second World War, probably misled into Korea. I'm not real sure about that one, but I think we probably were. I certainly know we were misled into Vietnam with Turner Joy and Maddox and the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. We were misled into Desert Dust 1, and now we're stumbling around in the desert looking for weapons of mass destruction. Nobody shows anything except now, apparently, well, for, 100 years, or at least 90. And why is it that Americans just won't wake up? Are we that fearful? Are we that terrified?
Well, the mind control programs that have been foisted upon the people of the United States and the world in general are much more complex and sinister than people understand. The Tavistock Institute, which I believe is at the epicenter of this manipulation, is that they are very, very aware that through certain patterns is that they can create what is called compartmentalized thinking. And if you have seen the movie Manchurian Candidate, which is a very interesting movie, is that through a lot of different forms, first of all through the television, through the incessant repeating of misinformation, through the manipulation of our food, through the manipulation of our environment, through the manipulation of our ecclesiastical institutions, is that the people of this country and this world have been basically mind controlled. And now people are waking up from that and opening up from that, but most of the people are afraid. They are just absolutely afraid to consider the possibilities. And that's why shows like this are so essential.
Now, George,
really
also...
Thank you for doing the show.
Oh, George, believe me, the pleasure is all ours, and you've been very generous with your time. I don't know how you do it, to be honest with you, but we thank you that you do. Go back to what you wanted to speak about. We have about, 11 minutes left. Run with it, and also let's give ourselves time for ordering information.
Okay, well, first of all, I think it is essential for people to understand that the World Trade Centers they came down due to bombs, not due to the jets or the jet fuel. The day of the attack, both the architects and the engineers, and many of them were Israelis, said that there was no way that a 757 or a 767 could bring it down.
Right.
Because the World Trade Centers, there were 47 interior columns that were steel, huge, and there were 246 exterior steel columns that were all tied together with thousands and thousands of steel trusses. And they were engineered to sway in the breeze, and they were very, very, very well engineered. Now, the story is that the jets hit, and because the jet fuel was so hot that the girders and the trusses melted or got soft, and there was a compression or a pancake demolition. But in my movie and in my book, I show that after the hit of the plane is that there were actually people at the hold. There's no way that the people could have been at the hole if it had been so hot. Now, remember, no steel-structured building in New York or the United States or the world has ever come down the fire. Now, for example, the Meridian Plaza, which was in Philadelphia,
exactly,
8 stories of it were on fire for hours and hours, and it was an extremely hot fire.
19
Firemen
hours.
died, and when they finally put it down, there was a lot of damage, but the integrity of the building was not hurt.
Right.
Now, the fires at the World Trade Center, remember all the black smoke? That indicated it was a cool burning fire. That's because of all the sheetrock and the carpet, and there wasn't that much oxygen in there.
And steel doesn't like to burn either, by the way.
Yeah, and it was burning at about 1,250 degrees. And in one building it burned for 47 minutes, and the other an hour and 15 minutes. The highest, it was a cool fire. Those steel beams would not even come close. There were thousands of them in there in the trusses, and they wouldn't, when you look at a fireplace, you put a fire mantle in there, and it's steel.
That's
Does
right.
that melt? No, it
Nope.
doesn't. Now, the beams, there's no way that they came down, and because steel doesn't melt until 2,700 degrees. It just will not happen. Now, when you look at the buildings coming down, the South Tower is the top 14 stories tilted and started coming down. Now, if it tilted and started coming down, as we show in the documentary, is that the top section, and quite clearly there was an explosion there that took place that caused it to come over. The top section, and you will see it, should have come down by itself. But then there was a series of detonations, and you can see this with your own eyes, and you can see this in the seismographic information that comes from Columbia University.
Right.
Now, there's 3 ways that we can prove this. Is that first is that the speed of the fall is that if you take Galileo's theory of fall, which is distance equals 32.16 divided by 2 times time squared, is that the fastest the buildings could have come down, and the buildings were 1,366 feet, was 9.46 seconds. Now, that's in a total vacuum. Now, if there was any resistance, like hundreds of steel columns,
right,
and trusses, it would have taken longer. Now, the South Tower came down in 10.4 seconds. The North Tower came down in 8.1 seconds. That defies the laws of gravity. Why can't people figure this out? Now, the second thing is, you look at the forensics, and remember that big gray cloud of smoke that chased everybody? Nobody asked what that was. They just thought it was dust. But what it was is that the buildings, the concrete, the building materials were scrambled. They were totally pulverized.
That's
They
right.
were turned into dust. Now, if you were to take several tons of jet fuel and put it next to a bunch of cement and blow it off, it would crack and singe the cement, but it wouldn't pulverize it. It wouldn't turn it into dust because the jet fuel only expands at 208 feet per second. It would take a compound such as RDX, which is the main component of C4, which expands at over 1,000 feet per second to create the forensic residue that was created. This is just simple stuff. Third is the heat patterns. Remember, the fires were only burning at 1,250 degrees. A week after the buildings came down, is that NASA did a thermal imaging of the area, and on the surface of the area, and this was after millions of gallons of water were poured on it, and that a lot of the stuff had been taken out, is the temperature on the ground was over 1,370 to 70 degrees. This defies explanation unless there was RDX and C4.
Right.
Now, Christopher Bolin, who is one of the greatest investigative journalists in the world, found out from the guys who were doing it is that the foundational beams that were 70 feet underground, no oxygen, no jet fuel, no nothing, were melted. Now, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the only way those big, thick, 3-foot beams could melt is if you had temperatures of close to 3,000 degrees, which is impossible for a compression demolition. There had to be explosives set in there, and you can see again through the seismographic. Then you take a look at building number 6. We have pictures in the documentary that before building number 2 is even touched, and building number 6 is not hit with an airplane or nothing, it blows up. Now, friends, buildings just don't blow up by themselves. There have to be bombs. And then the building, and it was blown up from the center. It blows up. You can see it with your own eyes in this documentary. And then it burns for 6 or 7 hours, but did the steel structure come down? No. And then you take a look at building number 7. Building number 7 had some very interesting tenants. The CIA, the Secret Service, the FBI, and Mary Giuliani. It didn't catch fire until several hours afterwards. It was a very minor fire, and at 5:30, it came down completely by itself. And then when you look at the seismographic on it, it was a totally different signature. It was the signature of a different type of implosion or what they call a pull. Mm-hmm. And that came down, and when you look at it, it is absolutely, completely a prearranged pull or pull down. And even though the American public saw thousands and thousands of pictures of buildings 1 and 2 coming down, we were only shown very few times building 7 coming down. And so number 1 is the speed that they came down defies gravity. Number 2 is the forensic evidence. And number 3 is the heat patterns. And then you look at what happens with building number 6 and 7, and anybody with any common sense will realize that we're being lied to.
Oh, without a doubt. And, you know, the argument about the free fall of the debris is something that stops a lot of people. And I work for a university, and we have some people there, especially in the science department, who are very intrigued by that. And as much as they may not want to come to the conclusion that we have, George, you know, they're doing it from a very hard fact standpoint, and they come to the same conclusion, regrettably.
Yeah, and the problem is that most people, even good educated people, because there is so much cognitive dissonance, they are so defensive about their positions that they find it almost impossible to process or look at this. But once you do look at this information objectively, the information is overwhelmingly visually there for anyone to figure out that this was an inside job. And if there were bombs in the buildings previous to the planes hitting, that changes the whole equation, everything.
You know, George, I've heard a lot of people say, you know, we're really turning heads and getting public opinion on our side. I really didn't believe it until this last week or so. And now I'm starting to see, even from those I've been emailing for a long time, that, you know, they're coming to the same understanding that something is radically wrong.
Yeah, all around, not just in the United States, all around the world, people are waking up to this very, very quickly.
This is the Grassy Knoll. We've been talking with George Humphrey, author of Common Sense, An Introduction to the Dangers of the New World Order. Also 9/11, The Great Illusion, also now out in a powerful DVD. George, thanks so much for being with us. It's been a long time, and I'm glad we had this time together.
It's been a real honor, and I thank all the listeners.
All right. God bless you. Take care of yourself.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thanks, George.